Greetings, everybody. Peter Maravellis here on behalf of City Lights booksellers and publishers and the City Lights Foundation. I'd like to welcome you to City Lights Live, the virtual reading series that follows in the footsteps of our in-store calendar. We continue to feature the works of authors we know and love through readings, discussions, and forums moving into the summer season. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. We'd like to take this moment to acknowledge those who have come before us as the stewards of the land and give an offering of respect. Tonight on City Lights Live, we are delighted to have with us Alicia Malone in conversation with Eddie Muller. We're celebrating the publication of Girls on Film, Lessons from a Life of Watching Women in Movies. It's published by Mango Press and authored by Alicia Malone. In it, she explores what it means to be a woman and to be in love with classic film. She shares her personal insights from a life of filmgoing and research with an emphasis on the viewing of the world of film through the lens of women. The book is filled with great anecdotes and storytelling, and it is so obvious through her effusive prose and enthusiasm for her subject that Ms. Malone is somebody who's truly in love with film. So Alicia Malone is a film reporter, television show host, producer, writer, editor, and self-confessed movie geek. She is a host on Turner Classic Movies and the host of TCM Imports. She was previously a host on FilmStruck and is the creator and host of the weekly show Indie Movie Guide on Fandango. She has appeared on CNN, The Today Show, MSNBC, NPR, and elsewhere. She is the author of The Female Gaze, Essential Movies Made by Women, and Backwards in Heels, The Past, Present, and Future of Women Working in Film. So joining her tonight in conversation is none other than Eddie Muller. Eddie Muller needs very little introduction around these parts. He is a writer, film historian, film restoration advocate, and host of Turner Classic Movies' Noir Alley. He is also the founder and president of the Film Noir Foundation and driving force behind San Francisco's Noir City Film Festival. His published works include Dark City, The Lost World of Film Noir, The Art of Noir, and much, much more. He's also penned a couple of really awesome novels, The Distance and The Shadow Boxer. Now, it's a great pleasure to have him in our orbit once again. Also, I want to share a little personal anecdote. Eddie and his wife, Kathleen, actually married my wife, Julia, and I to each other. So it's in the family tonight. So before we begin, I'd like to let you know we're going to be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard, and with which you may purchase copies of Girls on Film. We're also going to be hosting a Q&A towards the end of the evening. So please post your questions, your comments, your praise in that same chat function. Please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Alicia Malone and Eddie Muller. Such a pleasure to have you both with us tonight. Welcome to City Lights.
Hello.
Very happy to be here, Peter. And Alicia, it's great to see you, as always.
Yeah, great to see you. I always love talking to you. And even if that means we're doing it via Zoom in front of people, hey, I'm glad we get to catch up.
Absolutely. I love that Peter decided to tell people about the thing that my wife and I married them, because it solidifies my position as the high priest in the Church of Noir.
I love it. And it sounded like it was a really fun wedding, and they're still together. So you've got a good track record.
Yes. I'm batting 667. I've married people 3 times, and two of those couples are still together.
Not bad.
That's pretty good. So this is the tome in question. I loved this book, Alicia. It was so much fun reading it. It's rare these days when I read a book straight through. But this one I went straight through. So I'm going to be very pedestrian to start off and ask you, what prompted you to write this now? Because it is a bit of a, and it's because it's a memoir, and you're still very young. You're not memoir age yet, but but you approach it in a very interesting way. So tell us what the genesis of it was.
Yeah, well, I mean, Eddie, like yourself, I get asked the question a lot about why I love classic films, how I came to love classic films, how I got my job at TCM, why I moved from Australia to LA. And so I would get asked these questions a lot. And it was something that I started to consider myself, particularly why I watch classic films once we got into the pandemic and I was locked in my apartment, and I noticed the kinds of films that I would turn to for comfort. And like we hear from a lot of TCM viewers, these are films that we are nostalgic for, films that we grew up watching, and films that aren't necessarily safe for everyone who was present at the time. You know, they're not, they have problematic areas, but they still feel comforting and safe to watch. So I started considering, you know, what it meant to love classic films, particularly as I grew up and went through the various stages of womanhood. And so I thought I would challenge myself by writing a personal book this time around, as opposed to my previous books, which were just strictly nonfiction. And I wanted to try to weave in personal memoir with film history and film analysis and just make it really accessible to people, because at the end of the day, what I'm really about and what we're all about at TCM is inviting more people in to watch classic movies.
Right. And so, I'm not going to be a fanboy here and gush too much, but when we first met, I was so impressed with, you know, your personal story of how incredibly courageous you were to come from Australia to California with like nothing.
Yeah.
And this idea of you were going to make something out of yourself based on the movies, without giving away everything that you've written in this book. Can you just share with the folks like that part of your story, like what you did in Australia and then how it led to your coming to the United States?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, growing up loving classic films and reading classic film books, I would read the story time and time again of the girl that goes to Hollywood and changes her name, changes her persona, and becomes something else. And that was always in my mind from a young age, of going to Hollywood. And I started working in television in Australia, first behind the scenes in crew roles. And then when I started working at a cable network, movie network in Australia, I thought, oh my gosh, it would be so much fun to get to be the one that interviews the filmmakers and get to be the one that tells people my opinions on movies. And it was never about wanting to be famous or well known. It was just wanted to share my opinion of films. So I started working there in Australia as a producer, editor, writer, director, and host, because you have to do everything in Australia. It's such a small industry. I would watch the girl that was in LA, and she got to interview so many wonderful filmmakers. She got to talk to Martin Scorsese about his latest film. And again, I started thinking, wouldn't that be fun? And I always had the dream of going to Hollywood. So one day I just decided that I would try my luck in LA. And everyone thought I was crazy. They said, you don't know anyone in LA. You've been to the city once before. You don't have any savings. No job prospects to speak of. You don't even have a visa. What are you going to do? And I just had a feeling that it would be scarier to stay and do the same thing and never try than try and possibly fail. I didn't see it as a failure, because I knew I was privileged. I could always come back to Australia if I wanted to. You know, it wouldn't be such a big deal if it didn't work out. But I had to give it a go. So I managed to get a visa, but it was a visa that only allowed me to work in entertainment. So that was tricky once I got to LA, because I couldn't even work in a bar or anything to make money. I had to work in entertainment. I packed up 2 suitcases, and I had this very cinematic idea of like a bus going to Hollywood. I mean, I was on a plane, but I had the idea of the bus, you know, pulling away and leaving me with my 2 suitcases on the ground, being like, I'm here in Hollywood. Of course, that's not what happened, but I just was so determined to give it a go. And once I moved there, of course, I had these glorious ideas of what Hollywood was. But I was lucky that I started to find work for Australian television at first, and then for American television. But one day I pulled out that little notebook, and I was watching TCM, and I wrote down on my goal list that one day I would love to work with TCM, because once I moved to LA and I didn't know anyone, watching TCM was a way for me to not feel homesick, because there were all my favorite movies that I grew up watching. And so I felt like I had company when I would put it on in the background, which is something we hear often from viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, I'm telling you, that is such an incredible saga, and more than just work with TCM. Didn't you say in that notebook like
Yeah, like host.
host on
I said host
TCM?
like question mark host because I didn't think it was possible at that time. It was Ben and it was Robert Osborne, and there was no other hosts that were going to be hired. They were set in their way, and I even would copy down some of the introductions from Ben and Robert Osborne and get
Don't
out my
copy Ben's.
camera.
Don't copy Ben's. That's
No,
not a good idea.
mainly Robert Osborne. No, yeah,
Yes.
and then I would do it to camera and I would watch it back, or I think about how I would write an introduction to that movie. So that was always the dream, but I wasn't sure if I would ever make it happen. I just knew that was the type of place that I wanted to work for, somewhere I could feel like I fit in finally, because as I say in the book, all throughout my life, I always felt like the odd one out, the one who loved classic films when none of my friends did, none of my family really did.
Hmm. I was going to ask, what kind of, you said everybody thought you were crazy, but
Yeah.
did you have support at home for this? Or were you like the nut who liked movies? Because
Yeah,
I think all of us have, you know, at some time in our life, we were told, so when are you going to put all that away and grow up? You know, and forget the arty stuff, right? Whether it's movies or whatever it is, if it's the arts, you're told to forget it at some point. Did that happen
Yeah.
with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, straight out of high school, I said I didn't want to go to university because I wanted to work in television. I thought that would be easier than working in film. And my mom, I mean, she was very supportive of whatever I did, of course, but she was so worried for me. She said, I just want you to have some kind of degree. Doesn't matter what it is, but just some kind of piece of paper that you can use to possibly get a stable job. And when I started working in television, it was the same thing. Oh, it's such a fickle industry. Like, how are you going to survive? How are you going to pay your rent? And when I moved to the US, it was like, how are you going to do this? Like, LA is a big city. I really didn't have many people at all who said, you'll be fine. Most people said, we'll see you when you get back here, once you get it out of your system. And I did question myself because I moved to LA when I was 29. So I was, quite far on, and my friends were married and they were having kids and they were buying houses. And I moved to LA, and there were times when I had 25 cents in the bank. And I felt like, am I being selfish in just pursuing this dream where everyone else is following the expected life path and settling down and being able to eat dinner, not having to survive on toast? But just that little voice in me just kept me going, and said that I wanted to work in a field that I was passionate about. And I was very
Mm.
passionate about classic film. Still am.
As I am well aware.
Yeah.
You accomplish this in a very fascinating way. You created your persona on the internet. You basically created this character of Alicia Malone. Can you just talk a little bit about that? And it's a fairly common thing now, with people who've become influencers and they use social media, and now everybody sees a track to becoming, honestly, most of these people, I think they just want to be famous. They don't really have a burning passion for something. But you were one of the first people that I encountered that had created this whole package
Yeah.
online. And I'm going to be honest, Alicia, I thought, wow, she's great, but where does that go?
Yeah.
Right? Because I didn't see what was going to happen with the internet and how all of this would be cross-pollinated at some point. So if you could just talk a little bit about that, because you've never really discussed this with me, and I think it's fascinating. So
Yeah. Like I said, just growing up reading books about classic film stars and having them always create these personas, that was in my mind. I changed my last name when I was out of high school because I thought Alicia Malone sounded like someone who could one day go to Hollywood and achieve all these things. And Alicia Holdsworth, as I was born, just seemed like someone quite pedestrian and growing up in Canberra. And, so I was creating this version of myself even after high school. And then when I moved to America, I mean, because deep down, like I can do these events, I can go on camera, I can speak in public, but I am, like many of us film lovers, an introvert deep down, and I'm quite shy at times. And I was very shy when I grew up, and even shy when I moved to LA. And LA is such a daunting city because it's full of people who are ambitious and out to achieve their dreams and are larger than life in a very confident way. And I remember when I moved over, and one of my American friends had to teach me to not do the very Australian thing of saying like, oh yeah, I'm just a TV host, but nothing special. Like, oh, don't worry about me. It's that's a very Australian thing. And I was countering Americans who would be like, I'm a producer. And then after a while, you think like, are you a producer, or do you want to be a producer? There's that bravado. So I thought I needed some of that. So I thought, okay, everyone in LA is blonde, and I'm a natural blonde. I'm going to dye my hair red because then it'll stand out. I am doing these press junkets, but I want to stand out with the star and build a rapport with them. So, and I am not a touchy-feely person, so I will go out of my comfort zone and I'll ask them for a hug. And then that became a thing that I would do at the end of all my interviews. And then I've always been someone who both hates technology and is an early adopter of technology. So I could see where YouTube was going, and I could see Twitter. I joined up Twitter really early on. So that's why I had my name, because I was right on there. I was one of the first Alicia Malone to join. And so I could see that this could be a path to at least just start to, and I was thinking of it very strategically. Again, it wasn't about being famous. It was like, okay, I want to be a host on TCM. What does that mean? Okay, well, I have to be known as a film expert, a classic film expert. I have to have things to show to say that I'm a classic film expert. I also have to do all the work in the background, reading books, watching movies, trying to learn as much as I can and work on my hosting skills. But I can start to at least create this body of work online, because if no one was giving me jobs in that avenue, I could start a YouTube channel myself to talk about classic films and independent films and women on film and things I was passionate about. I could start speaking about that on Twitter. I could start posting pictures like that on Instagram. And social media, as we know, is very much it's an appearance. It's an appearance of doing well, or it's a highlight reel, a portfolio. It doesn't show who you really are as a person. So I wanted to use that to my advantage and just show the highlights of me being this classic film expert. And then one day I was doing this podcast that I was just doing for free on the side because it gave me the opportunity to talk about classic films. And the head of the podcast studio said, "What's your dream job?" And I said, "Work with TCM." And they said, "Well, I know the head of talent if you want me to put you in touch." And I said, "Not yet. Give me a year. I need to work on myself." And I had my YouTube channel, I had my Twitter, I had my Instagram, all creating this Alicia Malone classic film expert persona, which is true, but also I wasn't talking about anything else. I wasn't talking about politics or anything else I care about. I just wanted to put out to the world that this is who I was, so that when I got that opportunity, I could show up and here is all the volume of work I've done. And it gave me some kind of credit to my name when no one would give me a chance in that particular field.
So what was the difference between, and it takes a lot of guts and understanding of yourself to say rain check on that introduction to TCM. I'll take a rain check. Because I think in Los Angeles, especially, most people would construe that as, oh, she's insecure, or she's, doesn't have the stuff. If you're not ready to pounce on your opportunity, then you're not going to make it. But you did. And what transpired in your life to get you to the point where you said, okay, I'm ready now, Mr. DeMille. I'm ready for my close-up.
Yeah, well, because it was interesting that I said, oh, not yet. I'm not quite ready. And it was just this gut feeling of like, okay, I've got to do more work on myself before I get to that point. I know I'm only going to get one shot, right, to make this first impression. So I guess it probably was a bit of insecurity, but it was me just wanting to feel absolutely prepared. And I think that the person that I spoke to and said, wait, just give me another year, I'm pretty sure he thought that, okay, she's never going to come back. She's not going to follow up on this. She's just going to be one of these people that are all talk but not actually do anything to make it happen. But I thought, all right, let's just get myself to a position where I feel like I am completely ready. And then the ironic thing and the lucky thing was, at that time, if I had met Darcy, who was the head of talent at the time, I probably wouldn't have gone anywhere if I met her at that moment. But a year later, she happened to be looking for hosts for FilmStruck when that streaming service was starting. So she was in that mode of looking for not only people who love classic films, but people who love foreign films. And in the process of us having coffee, I mentioned all these foreign films that I love. And so then she thought, okay, she might be the right person to do this. But it was interesting that it ended up working out perfectly to my advantage. And I was still nervous and still not sure that I was ready, but I felt more ready than I had felt a year before.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about something that's a subject that we've discussed quite a bit, and it's the gender bias stuff that we've encountered in the business and also just in film scholarship. Because a lot of what you've done as a writer, beyond your hosting stuff, your books, because you also wrote a terrific book called Backwards and in Heels, which is, you can explain the famous quote if people don't know it. But, but it's something that I've also really become cognizant of in recent years, because I've met more people like you and other women who write about film, the realization that so much of film history has been dictated by men, and very often giving a false narrative about the history of motion pictures. So I think a lot of what you've done has been a corrective, attempting to correct that narrative. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, and I would say that I haven't been, at the head of any of this research. I stand on the shoulders of all the other great film historians and female film critics who had done all the hard work. I just see myself as someone who can amplify that work because I'm lucky that I have a platform. But I didn't realize when I was young, and I write about this in the book, that I had consumed just a volume of work of films directed by men and film critics who are men and even film hosts who are men. There was a volume of work that was available written by women, and lots of films, as we know, directed by women in existence, but I didn't seek them out because I didn't even realize that what I was doing, that I hadn't considered anyone who wasn't like white, cisgendered, male, straight, younger, whatever it is. So I was annoyed at myself for robbing myself of that pleasure of discovering these great female directors. It didn't happen till later, but I think that's because the other work was so prevalent. And as we know, it's like the film canons, the best movies of all time are often all the ones directed by men. Film history classes often teach lots of films directed by men. And there are great films, of course, that deserve to be taught, but there is so many movies and film critics and hosts who are women. And I think in the end, what it's done is sort of engender the idea of movies as being male owned. I see this playing out when I was on social media. I see this playing out on Twitter when, say, a female film critic talks about a Marvel movie or a Star Wars movie or something that feels like the boys own it. and then she gets shouted off the internet saying, "What do you know?" I think it's just really imbued film itself as being a male medium, and then women are just lucky to be there. And I know even when I started at TCM, I was very intimidated thinking about then the legacy that I was stepping into with the great Robert Osborne, because of course, none of us can ever replace him, and we
Takes five
definitely.
of us.
Yeah, it takes five of us, and we do the best job. And we everyone, of course, understandably, including myself, miss Robert Osborne so much. So I was really overwhelmed by that. And also, when I started, honestly, the kind of questions I would get versus the questions that, say, Dave would get when he started at the same time, it often felt like, prove yourself. Like, what do you really know? And he sort of came into it with people just taking his experience, at face value. And of course, he proved himself as well, but no one really questioned his knowledge as much as they questioned my knowledge. And I think, again, it's just this idea that movies are a male medium. And if a woman walks in, I remember getting comments on TCM of like, "Oh, she's just there for eye candy." And I was like, I don't think TCM cares that much about eye candy, but it's all about appearance for women a lot of the times, and you get comments about your voice, et cetera, et cetera. That's a bigger problem than just film, but I think we see it a lot in movies, the kind of prove what you know if you're a woman.
And it was much, I mean, I know because we've been pals since the network sort of brought us together. But it's incredible how much more difficult it is for women. I know, but I'm using you as a personal example of this because and I know you don't want to say anything negative about our employers, but I never had to deal with any of the issues that you've had to deal with being an on-air host. I mean, nobody cares about my hair or the way I dress or anything. It just doesn't even enter into the conversation.
Yeah.
And yet that seemed to be a big priority when you came aboard,
And I have to say, it's so much better at TCM than it has been in the past for me. I mentioned in the book just like blatant examples of being told to lose weight, that I would be much more successful if I had lost weight, or that I should dress sexier when I go to talk about films on CNN or NBC or whatever it is. And I never understood why I needed to look like a model in order to be a film expert, and also knowing that if I did look like a model, no one would believe that I was a film expert, because
Right.
Why would I bother if I was that pretty? So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't think. But there's a lot of focus as a woman on what you look like, and it can be exhausting because you just want to say, but what about what I'm saying? The content. What do you think of that?
Yeah. And to backtrack for a second to the history of film stuff and the film scholarship, when I was growing up, there were female film critics. I read Pauline Kael, and obviously Judith Crist was a really big film critic in this country. Many others, Molly Haskell, and but the scholarship, what you get when you outside of the daily newspapers and things, the scholarship I found was all really being written by men. And this occurred to me when I became so deeply involved in film noir, and there's so many preconceived ideas about what that is, and so many gender things involved in that, like they only can have male protagonists. It's film noir with a male protagonist. But if Barbara Stanwyck or Joan Crawford is the lead, then it's a dark melodrama. It's not really
woman's
film noir,
picture,
right? It's a woman's picture or something. And when I realized that, I suddenly saw that the whole thing was constructed like that. Like all of the scholarship of film history is basically written by men.
Yeah.
Even though, as you point out in your book, in the early days of Hollywood, that was not the case. Women were a huge part. At least half the movies in Hollywood were written by women.
Yeah.
And it honestly wasn't until Wall Street sort of solidified its hold on the movie business that then those businessmen
Yes.
said the men have to be in charge. We
Yes,
don't
it's like,
actually
thank you,
trust
but
the,
we'll take it from here, which I think happens in quite a few industries as well. Once they become profitable and once they become set up more as a business, then you need executives. And especially at that time, women weren't thought of as being executive or business minded, and no bank felt comfortable in lending that amount of money to a woman. So they were really kind of pushed out once the studios started to form. And I agree with you, Eddie. I likened it to the sunglasses in They Live. You know, when you put them on and suddenly you see the whole thing. You see what's
yeah,
real, the messages that we've been told all our lives about women. It's suddenly very prevalent.
yes, absolutely. So I've never asked you this question before. So because I never ask people for lists or anything like
Mm.
that. So
Hmm.
if you had to pick like Alicia Malone's 5 most influential movies. I'm not going to say what are the best
Mm.
movies, like movies that really formed you either as a person or really had a major impact on your love of cinema or your
Mm.
understanding of cinema. What are those films? Do you
Yeah,
have
I
that
would
list handy?
I can think it up. So I definitely, one that I mention in the book is Gentlemen Fur Blondes, and that was one of my early introductions to classic films. And because it was so beautiful to watch, I was mesmerized by it, and especially by Marilyn Monroe. But she was the reason I started to read books about film, because I had a feeling, even though I couldn't articulate it at such a young age, that there was more to her than what was on the surface. It seemed like it was a performance that she was giving, not only as her character, but as herself. So that really started the ball rolling into reading biographies about stars, and then going from there into film criticism. And from that, Rear Window, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, was one of the most influential films for me, because it was the first time I realized what a director was, and that there was someone who was behind the scenes pulling all the strings and making it happen, and manipulating the audience to make you feel a certain way, one way or the other. And then once I got older and I started to explore more foreign films, I would say, even though it seems quite obvious, but Breathless was, like, for many people, one of the films I saw when I was a teenager, and it left a great impression on me as being something different, something fresh, and changing my mind about what a foreign film could be, that could be exciting and feel relevant and cool and fun to watch. And of course, you could talk a lot about the way in which it's inspired by Hollywood gangster films.
Yeah,
But then,
absolutely.
and a film that I'm sure you love, The Hitchhiker by Ida Lupino. That's one that I always cite because it was one of the films I saw directed by a woman that changed, again, any biases I had about what a female director could direct, particularly being that she directed this, during, what was it, the 40s or the 50s. And it's such a tight film noir, it's claustrophobic, it's all men as well. And so it
Exactly. Yeah, there's no
shows
women in it.
no
Yeah.
women. I love the shots that she chose and the way it makes you feel like you are in the car with the men. So that's a film that I always recommend to people, as showing that female directors have always been able to direct multiple genres. And then the fifth one I would say is Dance Girl Dance, which is a film I also talk about a lot, by Dorothy Asner, because reading her story was part of the reason I became passionate about wanting to amplify these stories about women, because she was someone who wasn't, well known or revered during her time. I mean, she was probably well known, but she wasn't revered or as she should have been in her time. She was discovered again in the 70s, and much later by other great female film critics who started to point out her story and the way that she was the lone female director working in the studio system at that time. But that film in particular, I think, says so much about women in entertainment. And as we were just talking about, the ways in which women need to perform on stage, and the way I just always love the Maureen O'Hara scene where she comes up to the end of the stage and she admonishes the mostly male audience, although there's some women in there too, for wanting her to strip. You know, she says like, you know, you can, so you can feel superior, like the superior sex for once, and it feels, you know, quite ahead of its time. So those would be my films just off the top of my head.
That was pretty darn good. It's interesting that, remember when we shot that promo for TCM, and they asked us all,
Hitchcock.
Yeah, exactly. That was it. Like, what director, you know, first got you excited about cinema? And every single one of us said Alfred Hitchcock. It was impossible to pick anybody else, right? We were only debating, like, what film was it? It wasn't the director, which is pretty extraordinary when you think about it, you know, like, wow.
I think it shows that he was that true author of a film or tour, because his voice is so prevalent in all of his films. And of course, we know that he was very particular about the way he shot the film, so it was very controlled by him. But fascinating figure. And I also became fascinated with the idea of the Hitchcock blonde as well.
And certainly, you know, the female gaze and the male gaze is a thing that's talked about a lot now. And he certainly had a male gaze.
Absolutely.
Anyway, it's I'm thinking about what film it was that I was mentioning, and now I can't even remember. No, I can't. So I'm going to forget it. The stuff you write about Marilyn Monroe in this book is absolutely fascinating, and I think that as you know, a cultural icon, she sort of cuts to just what we were talking about, that men tried to take control of her legacy after her death, and it was, you know, all up to them to describe what she was about. And it's only recently, really, that, you know, I guess I could simply say there's the Norman Mailer Marilyn, and there's the Joyce Carol Oates Marilyn, right? I mean, it's like two different things going on here. But you write some really smart and intelligent things in there, and I think it's so, I see it so clearly in your own thing that you were describing as, you know, if she's so pretty and so poised and looks like a model, how can she really have any intelligence? And now we're learning that, you know, Marilyn was kind of putting on an act, that she was incredibly bright and she knew exactly how to get ahead and get what she wanted by playing that part, you know.
Exactly. And she was sort of became a victim of her own creation, where she was so smart and savvy in the way that she created this persona of Marilyn Monroe, but then she became locked into it and people wouldn't take her seriously, and she couldn't get all the roles that she wanted to, but she was also deeply insecure. And, you know, when we're speaking about me creating a persona, there was a time not that long ago when I realized that Alicia Malone had sort of become this thing. And I wasn't quite, it was me, but it was sort of a more exaggerated version of me. And I wanted to get back to who I really was. And so hence going back to blonde, back to the real hair color.
Well, I hope if you don't want to answer this question, feel free to ignore it. But it's something I think about all the time now. So I mentioned earlier how you had used the internet to create this persona, but these days you are not that visible on the internet. In fact, I'm not going to say you have left Los Angeles, and you don't really engage in social media. Why is that, Alicia?
Yeah, I mean, I really got, and we've talked about this a lot, you and I But I wish that I had a thicker skin maybe when it comes to comments about myself, but I just don't. I know that a bad comment can ruin my day. And I found it to be so much healthier for me to not be performing all the time for other people, and be not having to read about what people think about me. I didn't feel worthy of either the adulation or the hate. Like I'm like, I'm just a girl talking about movies. I don't know why people love me or they hate me. And also at the end of the day, it's not really anything I can control what people think of me. And I could talk myself off the ledge so many times about these comments. And then at the end of the day, I thought this is just not helpful for me. Plus, during the pandemic, I was doing like everyone was doing, and I was doom scrolling through the news, getting all the updates all the time and on the screen constantly from the morning to the evening. And I felt just so anxious, and I felt like I was distracting myself away from what I was really thinking and feeling. And so I wanted to discover who I was without all the bells and whistles. And I wanted to hear what my soul was actually craving. And it was craving to move away from LA and to go to a small town. And where I live now, I mean, people think my job is interesting, but they don't really care what I do.
They don't
need
really
anything
care.
from me. They go, oh, that's weird, but they don't need anything from me. And so I've really been able to find myself again. Just who am I without all of that? Because LA is still very much a performative place. You have to perform. You have to always be hustling and networking. And what's next? What are you doing next? What about the next thing? And I wanted to live in just the joy of what I'm doing now, and to make it truly joyful by not reading any comments. So now I don't read anything that anyone says about me. I haven't read any reviews of my book, and I'm not going to, because it's all about the creation for me. And I figure, say with our job, we have producers and directors who'll tell me if they want anything different. But I just try to do what I do and enjoy what I do. And it's changed my life for the better. Found myself, and I found more self-esteem, and I have a much calmer nervous system from not being on the phone all the time.
Yeah, that's it's fantastic. I celebrate that because but it is tricky because whenever we have our meetings, right,
Hmm.
with our employers, it's like I kind of try to catch your eye whenever it steers towards like more social media and more social
You see me
media,
just
and
being
it's
like,
like,
oh, good.
oh no,
Can't escape. I know. I said I'm happy to do anything for TCM social media as long as I don't have to actually look at it. I can just do it and put it out in the world. That's fine. And there's still a lot of creativity to be found and things like TikTok. But I'm old as well. I just can't be scrolling all the time. I got
well,
movies to watch.
you got better things to do, right?
Yeah, I got movies to
So
watch. I got books to read.
that's what I spend all my time doing. If I'm not
Yeah,
absorbing, I'm creating, and that's all I
love that.
actually need.
Love
So
that.
it's good. It's very good. So what else do you want to accomplish? You've got a number of books under your belt now, and
I know.
you're
And I feel like, I mean, I know that probably many writers say this, but like you said at the start, like what prompted me to want to write essentially a memoir when I'm not at the memoir age is because I have always viewed this as being my last book. And yes, that could change, never say never, but as of now, I'm really happy with the books I've done. And so, work wise, there's nothing more I want to accomplish. I'm so happy. I just want to stay on TCM for as long as they'll have me until they kick me off. But then, if I lost my job tomorrow, I would go and work in a bookshop. I'd just be so happy just living my life. So the only thing that's on my list is to try to help, like yourself, preserve historic cinemas as much as possible. And I speak about in the book at the very end that there is a historic cinema for sale in the town near me now. And I'm trying to figure out if I could start a nonprofit in order to save it and run it. Or I've just been thinking as well, maybe I can help out at the beginning, like to start off with, programming for some of these historic theaters, bringing Noir City and festivals like that to these small towns and small theaters, and trying to help encourage people to get back into the theaters and to keep these old theaters going, because I just don't want to see them go away. And also, again, to encourage more people to watch classic films. But it's a change for me, who always had a goal list a mile long, to finally get to the point where I'm just happy doing what I'm doing. I'm happy in my life. And I just got a pile of rocks delivered, and I didn't know how much a yard of rocks was. So I got 4 yards, and
Oh,
it's a huge pile. So that's my only goal right now, is like, how do I shovel all those rocks and put them in my driveway?
so what are you building?
Lofty goals.
Are you building a
Well,
wall?
I was building I was trying to build little corridors between my garden boxes, because now I have a vegetable garden, because that's who I am now. But I got many, many rocks, so I'll have to put them somewhere else too.
I would take some off your hands, but you're a long way from me,
Yeah, do you
and
want
they're
to
a little
come
expensive to ship, so we're not going
get
to
some
do that.
rocks? I have plenty.
Okay, very good, very good. Last question I'm going to ask you before we go to some questions from the people who are viewing this. You talked about preserving a classic cinema. Any thoughts on this transition we're all undergoing from the theatrical experience to the streaming experience? It seems like, for years I have, been a bulwark of, exhibition. You have to see movies in a movie theater, and I'm getting a little weary because the writing seems to be on the wall. But
Yeah.
what are your thoughts about this when you experience, as someone who loves the experience of watching movies? What's the difference, and what are your concerns, if any?
Yeah, my concerns are that even myself, who loves going to the movies, have thought in the recent past, like, oh, I'll just watch that at home. Especially now that I've got a projector set up and it's great at home. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, if I'm feeling that, then what are other people feeling? But I think the optimistic version of that is that I do feel that independent theaters and community theaters are going to be more important from here on, because if you can get essentially the multiplex experience at home, then what's going to get you to come out to the theaters? And I think it's going to a theater where people know your name, or people program interesting things and you trust them, or it's a theater that you want to see keep going in your community, so you want to keep frequenting it and giving money. But I do feel like movies have to essentially become events. Like what you do is so wonderful. You bring out, you program films, people trust your programming. They know that they're going to see something interesting if they come to your festival, and they'll know they'll get something extra, whether it's a Q&A or an introduction. Same with the TCM Classic Film Festival. And I do feel like that's going to become more important in the future, to get people to come out, because you could just play Casablanca, but people again will be like, well, I can watch that at home. But if you brought out a special guest, or you made it a fun experience to go to the theater, then people might be more encouraged to go. So that's part of my idea with this programming idea, is like, how can I use the context that I have in order to make film going an event, and to start bringing some more classic films to this area and make it fun to go to the theater again, because I think that's going to be the way to do it.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm on your board of directors.
Yeah,
When you have that board of directors, I am the first
I love
one
it.
you're signing up. Okay,
I
very
love
good.
it. Thank you.
Okay, should we bring Peter back in to because he's the man with the questions.
Indeed, and we've got quite a few. I'm not sure if we're going to get through to all of them, but we'll do the best we can. So Rosabil asks, which is your favorite classic movie by a female director that may not be that well known? What in particular about it draws you in?
That is a good question. I already mentioned two, so I'll try to go for a different film, but something that I love. Um, Well, I would also, it's another Dorothy Asner film, but it's Christopher Strong, directed by Dorothy Asner, where Katharine Hepburn plays a female aviator. And this is a film that's probably not that well known in Katharine Hepburn's filmography or Dorothy Arzner's filmography, but it's perfectly matched character to Katharine Hepburn's sensibilities. And she wears some fabulous outfits. At one point, she comes out in this dress outfit that's like silver and it looks like a moth. But she has this heroic storyline, and it's a film that again is a fascinating movie. Doesn't get as much play as it should, and it's a movie that shows once again how brilliant Dorothy Arzner was as a director and how ahead of her time she was, because this is quite a feminist film when we look at it in hindsight.
I have a question or a comment and a question from Denise D. The 2020 documentary Women Make Film on TCM was more than just an introduction to less well-known female film directors around the globe, but it was also a masterclass in film. Do you have any additional comments on hosting that series?
Oh, that was such a wonderful experience. I wish I could take credit for coming up with the idea to program these films on TCM, but I had nothing to do with it. I was just lucky to get to host it. And Mark Cousins, I love him as a filmmaker. I think he has such a fascinating eye and a distinct voice. And I love the fact that he used his privilege and his ability to get films made to showcase all of these wonderful films made by women. And I like that his documentary, I think it's like 4 hours long, and we broke it down into parts because he just wanted to overwhelm people with examples of movies made by women, so that after you watch that series, you know that there's no doubt that women can make movies. So the great thing about doing it a silver lining, I guess, about doing it in the pandemic for me was that getting to speak with female filmmakers from around the world, using Zoom. I get to speak to filmmakers in Pakistan or in England and all different places that we don't normally get to speak to filmmakers from on TCM, because usually it's about bringing them to Atlanta. So it was just a real joy, and I felt like I learnt a lot during that series. Again, there were so many films that I'd never seen before, and I was angry that I had never seen them before. I felt like I definitely should have. So such a joy, and hopefully we'll get to do some version of that again. Maybe women edit movies or women write movies, various positions in filmmaking, not just directing.
And if I could just jump in, just a quick comment I want to make is I just want to give Turner Classic Movies its props, because I don't know if people are aware of how difficult the balancing act is that we have to pull off at TCM. I say we, we're the faces of the network, but what goes on behind the scenes to, please the hardcore fans of classic Hollywood movies, and yet expand the offerings to include all of these things from all around the world and all kinds of genres and everything. And when TCM does launch one of these special series, like Alicia's doing one now on the history of fashion in film called Follow the Thread. It's really great, by the way. You and Bob are a great team.
He's so much fun. And by the way, Eddie, it's storming over here, which I feel like is your influence.
Oh my goodness.
Thunder and lightning happening. It's exciting.
Okay. Wow. I had nothing to do with it, I promise. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Peter, I'm sure there's another question.
And in fact, I'm going to take the moment to jump in. Marjorie asks of both of you, can you speak about how movies are programmed on TCM? How much input do you both have? And they assume Eddie picks all of Noir Alley. Is that true?
Well, they do solicit our input as to what we want to show and ideas for series and things like that. People are less aware that we can't just show anything we want to show, even if it's been on TCM before, because there are all these rights issues and clearances and all sorts of factors involved. I agree with everything that is shown on Noir Alley. There are things that I want to show on Noir Alley that I cannot show yet. But Alicia, what's your experience with the programming side of things?
Yeah, the programming team have always been so open to suggestions, and once a year I get to pitch a bunch of ideas for the following year that get talked about in programming meetings, and sometimes they choose them, sometimes they don't, and then we get to pick sometimes the programming that we want to do. Like I put up my hand for Follow the Thread because I love fashion. So I've always found them very open, but I also just trust them so much. They have a lot of film knowledge. And again, like Eddie said, it's a lot more complicated than we might realize. So often it's just them picking the movies, and I'm happy to host whatever they give me.
So I have a question from Robin. Have you found that feminist films have changed as the definition or concept of feminism has changed and updated? Are there any that have aged poorly? And when you speak with or research films by women from countries outside the US, is the scope of what issues they cover different?
Yeah, definitely different when it's outside of the US. And sometimes there are issues that we are lucky we don't have to even think about here in America, like films about women being able to drive cars and have more independence. And so we, in some ways, Hollywood is ahead of its time, but some ways in, say, French movies, I'd say they're a bit more open to talking about sex and love scenes. I would say that films are starting to, with all the conversation that are happening, are starting to go on the road of being more aware about feminism and more aware about the treatment of female characters on screen. I think there's still a long ways to go, but there are definitely many, many more female film directors coming up in the last few years who have a distinct voice and something to say. And I'm so happy that it's starting on the road to that. I still bristle a little bit when you see a film with what they call a strong female character. And I think I've been guilty in the past of saying a character is a strong female character when they just, shoot guns and they do everything that the guys do and they fight. And it's like, oh, a strong female character. So I think we've got a ways to go before we truly show what feminine strength really looks like on screen, which is, vulnerability and all the softer qualities, as well as the ability to shoot guns if that's what they want to do. But it's getting there, but at least the conversation started.
Well, we have essentially run out of time. Eddie, is there anything else you would like to ask or comment on?
Well, I was just going to jump onto what Alicia was just saying. The actor Thomas Jane is a buddy of mine, and he did a show recently, a series in Australia. He went to Australia to make this, and I was amused when I was talking to him, and I said it was really great because I see it's noir, that's the whole thing, but I said, there's so many women involved, right? It's based on a novel by a woman, your co-producer's a woman, and all the directors of all the episodes were women. And he said, really? I hadn't actually noticed. He said, that's interesting. And I thought, wow, that's really something, that he was the producer of the show, and he was really just kind of, I'm picking the best people I can pick, and nobody had really pointed out that, oh yeah, like 70% of the crew and all the talent were women. And then you picked them, Tom. He goes, yeah, I guess I did pick a lot of girls. That's what he said.
That's great. I mean, I think that's what we're aiming for, right? At the end of the day, that we don't even think about it. It's not like, oh, it's strange that there's so many female directors. It's just a given. And at the end of the day, we all just want a variety of stories being told by a variety of people, because it just makes more interesting films for all of us to watch.
Absolutely. Well put. Well put.
And on that note, I'm going to encourage everyone, please pick up a copy of this book. And we have posted links in the chat function with which you may do that. This has been so much fun. Thank you both. Only regret I have is that, normally after these things would take place in the store, we'd all go out for drinks afterwards. So rain check to you both for that. And really, it was such a great pleasure to have you grace the virtual halls. Congratulations, Alicia, on an awesome book. Eddie, thanks for doing the honors. You are, of course, a consummate pro at this. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you in the audience for joining us. Some great comments, some great questions in the chat. And just want to remind you, you know, City Lights is actually open for business. We're open 7 days a week from noon until 8 p.m. Come on down, browse our stacks. We'd love to see you. The store misses you. Tonight's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through public events like this one, a publishing program, and educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So be safe, be well, everyone. We hope to see you again soon. Alicia, I will give you the last word.
Thank you. I just want to thank you, Peter, for having me, and also thank you, Eddie. I mean, it's always so nice to talk to you. I forgot that people were actually watching because I was just having a chat with you. But it means a lot that you both wanted to support my book in this way. So thank you. And thanks to everyone who was watching. I appreciate you.
We appreciate you, Alicia.
Thank you.